let's talk a little bit about the Mike Johnson. What is the take? First off, I mean, I think, it doesn't take long to read into Mike Johnson being some people will say a Christo-fascist, some will say a Christian nationalist, some will say a theocrat. I don't think from an academic perspective, any of those things are wrong. I mean, frankly.
But we do know that the founders...
Let's play this clip of Mike Johnson when this was his acceptance speech.
All my colleagues here, what I told the Republicans in that room last night. I don't believe there are any coincidences in a matter like this. I believe that Scripture, the Bible, is very clear that God is the one that raises up those in authority. He raised up each of you, all of us. And I believe that God has ordained and allowed each one of us to be brought here for this specific moment in this time. This is my belief. I believe that each one of us has a huge responsibility today to use the gifts that God has.
If you were a coronated king, I don't know, 800 years ago, this is not terribly different from what you would say.
Yeah. And you can look at his speeches throughout the years. He's very, dominionist, or, whatever the different words are for it, deeply into that world, just as deep as you could possibly get. And more keeps coming out. The question to me is, does the public know who the new speaker is? Do they care? But the Republicans have been good, and we talked about this on Counterpoints this week. Republicans have been pretty good about shutting up about abortion and trying to muffle their extreme social conservative wing,
regardless of
and kind of allowing the Supreme Court to do the dirty work.
Yes,
the memo has gone out, and the anti-abortion groups are they're not getting arrested, demanding a 0-week abortion ban, and so this is kind of this undermines that, because you scratch the surface of the House Republican Party, and this is what you find. He very much represents that House conference and a huge wing of that party, and so he just bubbled up through this process.
Well, I want to get more into that process, but I want to speak to this point, because this guy has said some really incredible things. First off, just that clip we just played, he's basically saying we're not here because we were voted by the people. We're here by God's will. And it's one thing to say, I've been blessed by God, and we couldn't have won this championship if it wasn't for God steering us. But you're not appointed by God. God does not raise you up. You have to be elected. You serve not at the pleasure of God. You serve at the pleasure of the people.
Right, but there's a whole tendency. Right, they don't believe that.
They don't believe that.
Right.
But this whole thing where he is pulling back on stuff, because of to be quiet about abortion. He was on Fox last night with Sean Hannity, and do we have him saying anything about the about abortion on there? He basically says, play this clip of him saying,
you hard. Specifically, I'll give you two big issues. One on the issue, you once worked for the Alliance Defense Fund, a Christian advocacy group, and comments you had made both in writing and advocacy for this group about homosexuality, calling it sinful, destructive, and not supporting gay marriage, quote, no clear right to sodomy in the Constitution. You have been getting hammered on this. And I want to ask you about it. I want to know exactly where you stand. Some of these comments were 15 years ago.
I don't even remember some of them. I was a litigator that was called upon to defend the state marriage amendments. If you remember back in the early 2000s, I think it was over 35 states, somewhere in that number, that the people went to the ballot in their respective states and they amended their state constitutions to say marriage is one man, one woman. Well, I was a religious liberty defense lawyer and I was called to go in and defend those cases in the courts. Let me state this very clearly, and there's been questions about this. Let me say where I am. Anybody that knows me will tell you this is true. I am a rule of law guy. I made a career defending the rule of law. I respect the rule of law. When the Supreme Court issued the Obergefell opinion, that became the law of the land, okay? I respect the rule of law, but I also genuinely love all people, regardless of their lifestyle choices. This is not about the people themselves. I am a Bible-believing Christian. Someone asked me today in the media, they said, it's curious, people are curious, what does Mike Johnson think about any issue under the sun? I said, well, go pick up a Bible off your shelf and read it. That's my worldview. That's what I believe. And so
that's
I make
your
no
personal
problem.
worldview.
It's my personal worldview. But here's
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is Hannity, who is without a doubt on the God Squad. I mean, he has been, a believer in end times for decades. I think really they are working overtime to try and sell this guy to the American public as not being a theocrat, and this whole plan of like outsourcing this stuff to the Supreme Court when necessary and just waiting. But this is this is about maintaining the House in 2024.
But I don't think it's going to help them. Their biggest handicap is abortion, because in every race where abortion rights were plausibly on the ballot, whether it was a state legislative, a contested state legislature, a governor, or an actual ballot measure, turnout absolutely surged among young people and among women, and it benefited Democrats. And for them to be raising the salience of that issue is probably going to hurt them. On the other hand, it's not as if abortion rights necessarily need their salience raised. It's one of those issues that, like, even if the media is not talking about it, people understand it. Like, so it's one of those unusual issues in that sense that
it doesn't necessarily, but I
doesn't
do
go
think
away just because the media stops talking.
But I'll tell you something. I'll tell you where it's going to make a difference. It's going to make a difference with New York Congress people and California Congress people, because when some challenger, I don't know, a Josh Riley running against Mark Molinaro or whoever's going to run against Lawler, they come in and they're going to say, like, you may have this opinion, but you're Speaker of the House. You vote for that guy for Speaker of the House, and you voted for him. Yeah. And that guy is believes this. Let's play this clip, and we should just say he's a rule of law guy. He says on Hannity, right? And some of those comments were so long ago he can't even remember. This is one from 2016. I know it's a long time ago. That's almost 7 years ago. But I'm pretty sure this was a settled matter 7 years ago, and he still had an issue with it.
What's happened, Alex, over the last 60, 70 years is that our generation has been convinced that there's a separation of church and state, right? We heard that term all the time. And most people think that that's part of the Constitution, but it's not. Remember, I'm a constitutional lawyer. What's happened?
He's a constitutional lawyer. Yeah. Church and state, not part of the Constitution. But just moments ago, we heard him on Hannity saying Obergefell is settled law. That's the Supreme Court. This guy doesn't, there's one of those two things he doesn't believe.
Well, also Roe was settled law. So like their claim that that something is settled law doesn't mean anything. That just means it's settled law until they unsettle it again. So I think you're right that in these key seats in California, New York in particular, it's going to be tougher, because like you look at Kevin McCarthy and you're like, that guy didn't care about anything. Like, it's harder to hit people with Kevin McCarthy because he's just like a transactional, like corporate politician. This guy just exudes what he is. It just pours out of him, and you can just see his speech from 4 days ago and know that he is not changed a single opinion that he had, 20 years ago. It is delightful, and I do want to take a moment to celebrate the fact that working on those, marriage equality ballot measures, working at, kind of being on the side he was on, is now something you have to apologize for and explain away. Like, that's nice. That's good. Because you and I remember being in the vast minority at the time. Like, he's right that majorities went out and passed those amendments and those referendums.
It's arguably how George W. Bush got elected for the first time, frankly,
right.
with a majority.
First time he won,
is in 2004. And I think in the run up to that election, George W. Bush was on national television, 7 p.m. Talk from the Oval Office, promoting a constitutional amendment, U.S. constitutional amendment to basically declare gay people second-class citizens.
I also think, by the way, that Bush and Rove politicizing that the way that they did forced Democrats to take a position that they didn't want to take. Like, Democrats would have been happy to say, marriage is between one man and one woman, but I support civil unions because everybody should be able to visit their loved one in the hospital. They would have been happy to just do that forever. But Rove kind of forced the issue on them. And it took 5-6 years after that. But if you force Democrats to take a position, yes or no, on a clear civil rights question like that, eventually they're going to be forced into the yes side. They
find out then, this is incredibly popular.
Everybody else agrees too. Yeah.
You could say the same thing.
Yeah.
That Democrats did the same thing with abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Back in 2004,
absolutely.
There was, Hillary Clinton was a big proponent of sort of some type of middle ground on abortion, as if that would in any way satiate the right or protect the right to an abortion in this country. What do you think that Johnson's going to do? Impeachment's going to go forward. They're going to sort of, I don't know what more they can do on the Hunter Biden front, but that's what it's going to be. What do you think he's going to do in terms of the budget? What do you think he's going to do in terms of, I don't know, are there any other, they're not going to have any other legislative agenda, are they? Or is he going to force these 18 sort of Biden district Republicans to take votes they don't want to take, or what?
They've got 2 weeks, no, 3 weeks, 21 days or whatever, to fund the government. November 17th. They're also facing this $100 billion request for both Ukraine and Israel. And interestingly, you had some like conspiracy people out there being like, I think Putin, did this Hamas attack. And it's like, no, but like the Hamas attack is going to grease Ukraine's $60 billion funding. So even if he did, it was a blunder on his part, because you can see Republican support eroding for sending money to Ukraine, but if you couple it with support for the Israeli war effort, it's gonna go through. And Mike Johnson, in that one clip you played from that was the 2000s or 2010s or whatever, he's sitting there preaching in front of an Israeli flag.
Oh yeah, these are a big part of the Christian Zionist movement, I would imagine.
Right, and so he's going to do everything he can. McConnell's going to do everything he can to get McConnell's one of the biggest Ukraine war money supporters in Congress, and so he's lost a couple steps for sure, but he's still quicker than Mike Johnson, I'm sure, when it comes. This is a guy who just got elected a couple terms ago.
What do you make of Mike Johnson's supposed inability to raise money? Is that going to be sort of a corrected once he becomes Speaker of the House? I imagine he's going to be able to raise a lot more, but can you really go from, what do you need to have developed these relationships over years and years and shown that you can deliver before you get that money, or no? What happens?
It helps. You would think that just self-interest would be enough for the big money to just flow, that Republicans shouldn't even have to ask for it. But that's not how super rich people are. You actually have to shake them down and wine and dine them, and make the calls and do the dinners, and have the fundraisers, and then they give you the money. McCarthy apparently, and I don't see it, but he was an incredible fundraiser. He was a charmer. Somehow he knows how to turn it on in private in ways he can't in public. And one of the reasons I think that Democrats were so unwilling to help him, people were like, why won't they just do this? He's fine. Like, what are you throwing? They were so glad to see the tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars that he was going to raise, not be raised, and you have to send now Mike Johnson to this fundraiser, who, culturally probably just doesn't connect as well with some of these, super rich Republicans. Clearly doesn't have much of an appetite for it. Just might not be good on the phone with these guys. Like that does matter. They've had to cancel a bunch of fundraisers because there was, McCarthy was going to be the headliner. That's money that's not coming in for them. So it's an actual potential problem. Republicans are always going to be well financed, but it's kind of a funny own goal in that sense.